RealAgriculture.com's coverage of the Western Canadian Farm Progress Show in Regina is brought to you by Morris. Hey Brenda, what effect do you think the unseeded acres are going to have on some of the prices in Western Canada?
Oh, well, okay, let's start with how many acres didn't get seeded. I guess the board came out this week and said 6 million acres didn't get seeded. Our estimate would be a little bit lower than that, but for the sake of argument, we don't really know, and we won't know for another couple of weeks. I know the weather's bad in most of the worst affected areas, and they're saying they're essentially done, but whoever's not here at the show is probably at home seeding right now in some of the marginally wet areas. So, okay, so when we figure out which crops aren't going to get into those 6 million acres, what are those 4 to 6 million acres, what would they have been if they had gotten planted? I ran the numbers on last year. Last year's very similar to this year in terms of the wet spring, the delayed planting, and a whole big area that didn't get seeded. But it's different in the region. It's not exactly the same region. The Northeast got in, looks good. The Southeast of Saskatchewan, definitely not getting in. Southwest Manitoba is, that's where they're feeling it for the first time. This is they're not used to not getting a crop in. I think somebody said 1999 was the last time where any amount of fields didn't get seeded there. So I think those guys are maybe just sitting back like, wow, really, I'm not going to get my crop in. And so the question then becomes for us is, what would they have seeded? The percentage that got seeded in these pockets is also different. We're hearing everything from 10% to 75%. And so then we look at, okay, if it's 75% seeded in this area is a big durum producing area. This area is a big sunflower producing area. So last year, the difference between farmer intentions and the final acreage, seeded acreage that we get in December from StatsCan, I ran those numbers. And last year, the canola went in. Like it wasn't even, I know it was somewhere around 2 to 4% of the intended canola acres didn't get in the ground. That's not a big number considering how big of an area and where it was last year. And I think that kind of fits with what you'd expect intuitively. Like canola makes a lot of money. Canola's pretty robust agronomically.
Can you seed it shallow so people get in there first?
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to get the canola in. It's going to be the high priority. Low priority. Last year we saw it was pretty much a tie for peas, barley, and oats. They were down somewhere between, somewhere in the 20 to 35% range of intentions compared to what actually went in. So now let's look at those three crops. Say this year, if those crops didn't, if the same math unfolds, those three crops are going to be down 20 or 30%. What does that mean? Well, it's fairly bullish in all cases. But that's just one piece of the bullish story. Feed barley has the whole corn machine behind it now, and feed barley and peas as well are heading into 11-12 marketing year with an extremely tight carryout. So feed barley kind of has its own story that's going to keep it really well supported until we find out what the quality of the cereal crop is. That's a bearish possibility that we get an early frost and all the wheat and all the barley gets downgraded so that we do end up with building up some supplies of feed grains. But boy, if that doesn't happen, if the malt guys are completely dry, not just in Canada but around the world. In Canada, the Canadian feed barley S&D is dry. Now peas is also really tight. For the third year in a row, we've seen this huge late season export program, and I think I mentioned the possibility of that in January. Anyway, so we had it again. Last 2 years we didn't notice it because we were working our way through this big mountain of supplies, and this year we're noticing it. We've gone from, I don't know, 750 to 850 in some areas, and one broker told me last night, I don't know if this is true or not, that he was trading 920 feed peas. It's 920 peas, but they were going to somebody who was grinding them up for the protein. And that's how much the protein is worth now. And then peas also have this feed bulk value that, is going to kick out corn and wheat, which is like $650 all over the place. So this is, peas is kind of finding its, finding value in all sorts of areas.
Do you think that we're possibly in one of those scenarios where we've got some corn yield concerns in the U.S. potentially, we've got some unseeded acres, we've already got a short carryout as it begins? We're really in a situation where we could see some much higher prices.
Well, okay, yeah. The way that we look at price forecasting, we develop a most likely price. We have 80% confidence that, for feed barley right now, it's $4. Yeah. For peas, it's 9, and for oats, it's 4. For peas, it's 9, and that's based on the S&D and everything we just talked about. You got the interaction of supply and demand, and then the price pops out. That's your equilibrium price. That's what we think. Like, we look at all the supply, all the demand, 80% confidence there. But then we also create a best and worst case scenario. So if all the bullish variables line up, we see pea prices going to 11. If all the bullish variables line up, we see pea prices or oats prices going to 5.75. That's a 10% extreme. So could prices go to the moon? Well, no. I mean, the laws of supply and demand, and prices do ration demand eventually. And the place where they ration demand the thresholds are different in different markets. And so the difference between our most likely forecast and the upper end is that space is different in different markets because of substitutability, because of,
because of the the volatility. Do you think that possibility range is getting wider right now, or is it getting narrower?
It's getting wider because of the overall volatility in the markets, for sure. I would say it's also wider in a tight year. 09 and 10 were not, we went through this in 07, 08. Everything got tight all at once. This whole huge uplifting of prices that coincided. Like, the tight carryouts all came along at the same time as ethanol blew up. And so, then we saw the 08 phenomenon. 2 years after that, we weren't in that same kind of supply tight environment, and the volatility was much less. Now we're getting back into tight carryouts. The volatility is exploding again. Yeah.
So which of the crops do you think is going to be the most positively, price-wise, the most positively affected by the unseeded acres?
Depends on. Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer, because we end up looking more at relative profitability. The reason why we forecast those prices is so that we can attach them to a client's yields and forecast their revenue. And so I like better to think about how much money is in this crop versus that crop, and you can't say that by just looking at the price on its own.